Welcome to Unlimited Horror Stories, your go-to channel for spine-chilling tales of terror and suspense. Today, we bring you a haunting story about Alex West, who inherits the infamous Bates Motel and reopens it to a new crop of strange guests. As Alex delves deeper into the dark history of the motel, he begins to unravel the twisted secrets that lie at its heart. But as he soon discovers, the evil that once haunted the place has not been exorcised, and it's not long before he becomes a target of its malevolent forces. We invite you to support our channel by subscribing and hitting the notification bell so you never miss an upload. And if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and share it with your friends. Stay tuned for more bone-chilling stories from Unlimited Horror Stories. Alex West had never expected to inherit the Bates Motel, but fate had other plans for him. His distant relative, Norman Bates, had passed away without any heirs, leaving the motel to Alex in his will. Alex was both excited and apprehensive about the prospect of owning such a notorious property. The Bates Motel had a dark and disturbing history, and Alex wondered whether he was up to the challenge of managing it. The motel had gained notoriety due to the gruesome murders that had taken place there years ago. Alex had heard the rumors and the legends, but he never believed them to be true. However, now that he was the owner of the motel, he couldn't help but feel a sense of unease whenever he thought about the place. Alex knew that the Bates Motel was a significant part of the local community's history. Despite its sordid past, people were still curious about the place, and it had become somewhat of a tourist attraction. Alex saw an opportunity to breathe new life into the motel and make it a thriving business once again. However, before he could start, he needed to address the issues that had led to the motel's downfall. The motel had been abandoned for years, and it was in a state of disrepair. Alex needed to invest a considerable amount of money to renovate the place and bring it up to modern standards. As he worked on the motel, Alex couldn't shake off the feeling that he was being watched. He felt like there was an invisible presence lurking in the shadows, observing his every move. He tried to dismiss his fears as irrational, but the feeling persisted. As he dug deeper into the motel's history, Alex uncovered more unsettling information. He discovered that Norman Bates had suffered from a severe mental illness that had led him to commit the heinous acts that had made the motel infamous. The more Alex learned, the more he realized that the motel was not just a property, but a cursed place that had claimed the lives of its victims and its former owner. Despite the challenges, Alex was determined to make the Bates Motel a successful business. He knew that it would be an uphill battle, but he was confident in his abilities. However, as he spent more time at the motel, he began to question whether he had made a grave mistake. Was inheriting the Bates Motel a curse or a blessing? Only time would tell. After months of hard work and countless sleepless nights, Alex West had finally completed the renovation of the Bates Motel. The motel had been given a new lease of life, with modern facilities and amenities that would rival any other hotel in the area. Alex was excited to reopen the motel and welcome the first set of guests. He had put in a lot of effort to create a welcoming atmosphere, with comfortable beds, clean linen, and a fresh coat of paint on the walls. However, despite his best efforts, Alex couldn't shake off the feeling of unease that had been creeping up on him since he inherited the motel. As the day of the grand reopening approached, Alex felt a sense of nervous anticipation. He knew that the motel's dark history would attract curious visitors, but he hoped that they would also appreciate the work he had put in to make the place more inviting. The first guests arrived in the early evening, and Alex was there to greet them. As he checked them in, he couldn't help but notice that they were a strange bunch. They seemed to be more interested in the motel's history than in the amenities it had to offer. Alex tried to brush it off and remain professional, but he couldn't shake off the feeling that something was off about them. As the night progressed, more guests arrived, each one stranger than the last. There was a couple that seemed to be constantly arguing, a lone traveler who refused to speak to anyone, and a group of college students who were more interested in partying than in getting a good night's sleep. Alex tried to be cordial and accommodating, but he couldn't shake off the feeling that the guests were testing his patience. He began to notice small things that were out of place, like doors that had been left open, lights that had been left on, and strange noises coming from the unoccupied rooms. As the night wore on, Alex began to feel more and more uneasy. He couldn't shake off the feeling that something was watching him, and he couldn't help but think of the motel's dark past. He tried to tell himself that he was being irrational, but the feeling persisted. In the early hours of the morning, Alex was awakened by a loud noise coming from one of the rooms. He quickly got up and went to investigate, but when he got there, he found the room empty. He could hear faint whispers coming from the room next door, but when he knocked, there was no response. Alex felt like he was losing his mind. He had never been a superstitious person, but he couldn't deny the strange occurrences that were happening at the motel. He tried to rationalize everything, but he couldn't explain the feeling of dread that had settled in the pit of his stomach. As the first night at the Bates Motel drew to a close, Alex knew that he had a long road ahead of him. The motel's history was not something that could be easily ignored, and he knew that he would have to be vigilant if he wanted to keep the guests safe. The grand reopening had been a success, but at what cost? As the days passed, the strange occurrences at the Bates Motel continued. Alex had thought that the first night had been a fluke, but it soon became apparent that something was not right. The guests seemed to be experiencing strange happenings in their rooms, but when they reported them to Alex, he found no evidence of anything out of the ordinary. One guest reported seeing a figure standing at the foot of their bed, but when Alex investigated, there was no one there. Another guest complained about hearing strange noises coming from the walls, but when Alex listened, he heard nothing. Alex began to feel like he was losing his mind. He couldn't deny the strange occurrences that were happening, but he couldn't explain them either. He tried to reassure the guests that there was nothing to worry about, but he couldn't shake off the feeling that something was watching him. The situation at the Bates Motel was beginning to take a toll on Alex's mental health. He was constantly on edge, always expecting something to happen. He had trouble sleeping at night, and when he did manage to get some rest, he was plagued by nightmares. One night, Alex was awakened by a loud banging noise coming from one of the rooms. He quickly got up and went to investigate, but when he opened the door, he found the room empty. He could hear faint whispers coming from the room next door, but when he knocked, there was no response. Alex began to question whether he had made a mistake in reopening the Bates Motel. He had inherited the place, and it was his responsibility to maintain it, but he couldn't deny that he was in over his head. The motel's dark history seemed to be catching up with him, and he didn't know if he could handle it. Despite the strange occurrences, the guests continued to arrive at the Bates Motel. They were drawn to the place's dark history, and Alex couldn't turn them away. He tried to keep a positive attitude, but he couldn't shake off the feeling that something bad was going to happen. One evening, a group of college students checked into the motel. They were loud and rowdy, and Alex knew that they were going to be trouble. He tried to keep a close eye on them, but they seemed to be constantly causing problems. In the early hours of the morning, Alex was awakened by a loud scream coming from one of the rooms. He quickly got up and ran to the room, but when he opened the door, he found the room empty. He could hear the faint sound of laughter coming from the room next door. Alex's heart sank. He knew that something was not right. He could feel it in his bones. He began to wonder if the motel's dark past was going to repeat itself. He tried to remain calm, but he couldn't deny the feeling of dread that had settled in the pit of his stomach. As the days passed, Alex became more and more convinced that the Bates Motel was cursed. The strange occurrences continued, and he knew that he couldn't keep the place open for much longer. The guests were in danger, and he had to put a stop to it. The grand reopening had been a mistake, and Alex knew that it was time to face the motel's dark past once and for all. Alex knew that he had to confront the dark past of the Bates Motel if he wanted to put an end to the strange occurrences that were happening. He spent hours researching the history of the motel, trying to find out what had happened all those years ago. He discovered that the Bates Motel had been owned by a man named Norman Bates, who had been a notorious serial killer. Bates had been responsible for the murders of several young women who had checked into the motel. The motel had been shut down after his crimes had been discovered, and Bates had been institutionalized. Alex was horrified by what he had discovered. He had no idea that the motel had such a dark past. He knew that he had to do something to put an end to the curse that seemed to be plaguing the place. He decided to seek the help of a psychic medium who had a reputation for dealing with haunted places. The medium arrived at the motel and immediately felt the presence of something dark and malevolent. She began to explore the motel, searching for any clues as to what was causing the strange occurrences. As she moved through the rooms, she felt the presence of a ghostly figure. She could sense its anger and resentment, and she knew that it was responsible for the strange happenings at the motel. The medium sat down with Alex and explained what she had discovered. She told him that the ghostly figure was the spirit of Norman Bates, who was still haunting the motel. She explained that Bates was angry that his legacy had been tarnished, and that he wanted revenge on those who had reopened the motel. Alex was shocked by what he had heard. He had never believed in ghosts before, but he could not deny the strange occurrences that had been happening at the motel. He knew that he had to do something to put an end to the curse. The medium told Alex that he needed to perform a ritual to appease the spirit of Norman Bates. She gave him a list of items that he needed to gather, including candles, salt, and holy water. She instructed him to light the candles and sprinkle salt around the perimeter of the motel. As Alex performed the ritual, he felt the presence of Norman Bates grow stronger. He could sense the spirit's anger and resentment, but he persisted with the ritual. Finally, he sprinkled holy water over the entire motel, and the spirit of Norman Bates began to fade away. Alex felt a sense of relief wash over him as the ritual came to an end. He knew that the curse had been lifted, and that the Bates Motel was finally at peace. The guests who had been staying at the motel during the strange occurrences were relieved that the curse had been lifted. They had been terrified by the strange happenings, and they were grateful that Alex had been able to put an end to it. Alex decided to close the Bates Motel for good. He knew that he could not bear the weight of its dark past any longer. He put the property up for sale, hoping that someone else would be able to restore it to its former glory. In the end, the Bates Motel became nothing more than a distant memory. Its dark past was buried deep in the past, and it remained a cautionary tale of what can happen when we ignore the sins of the past. After the ritual was performed and the curse of the Bates Motel was lifted, the guests who had been staying at the motel during the strange occurrences began to leave one by one. They were still shaken by what they had experienced and could not wait to put the motel behind them. Alex, on the other hand, was still trying to come to terms with everything that had happened. He couldn't help but feel a sense of guilt for reopening the motel and putting his guests in danger. He knew that he had made a mistake by ignoring the warnings of the locals, and he vowed to never make the same mistake again. He decided that he would never reopen the Bates Motel and that he would dedicate himself to a new project, one that would not be tainted by the dark past of the motel. As he was packing up the last of his belongings, he noticed a strange book on one of the shelves in the office. The book was old and dusty, and it had been hidden behind a stack of papers. He opened the book and discovered that it was Norman Bates' diary. Alex couldn't believe his luck. He had uncovered a treasure trove of information about the motel's dark past. As he began to read the diary, he felt a sense of unease wash over him. He could not believe the atrocities that had been committed by Norman Bates. The diary revealed that Norman had been a deeply disturbed individual who had been tormented by his mother's controlling behavior. He had killed several young women who he believed were a threat to his mother's dominance over him. As Alex read through the diary, he realized that Norman had been more than just a serial killer. He had been a victim of abuse, and his actions were a result of his twisted upbringing. He began to feel a sense of sympathy for the man who had haunted the motel for so many years. Alex knew that he had to do something to honor Norman's memory. He decided to donate the diary to a museum dedicated to the study of serial killers. He hoped that the diary would shed light on the psychology of serial killers and prevent others from falling down the same dark path as Norman. As he left the Bates Motel for the last time, Alex felt a sense of closure. He had confronted the dark past of the motel and had put an end to the curse that had plagued it for so long. He knew that he would never forget the lessons he had learned, and he would always be grateful for the experience, no matter how terrifying it had been. In the end, the Bates Motel remained a cautionary tale, a reminder of the dangers of ignoring the sins of the past. Its dark history would continue to fascinate and terrify those who heard its story, and it would remain a haunting reminder of what can happen when we fail to confront the darkness that lies within us. Years had passed since Alex West had left the Bates Motel for good, and the old building had been left to rot. It was a shell of its former self, a decaying relic that stood as a testament to the horrors that had taken place within its walls. Despite its dilapidated state, the Bates Motel had not been forgotten. In fact, it had become something of a legend, a haunted place that drew tourists and thrill seekers from all over the world. People came from far and wide to see the infamous motel, to walk in the footsteps of the victims and to experience the terror that had once gripped the place. Some came hoping to catch a glimpse of Norman Bates' ghost, while others simply wanted to take a photo in front of the iconic sign. Over time, the Bates Motel had become more than just a place of horror. It had become a cultural phenomenon, a symbol of the human fascination with the macabre and the unexplained. As the years passed, the legend of the Bates Motel only grew stronger. It became the subject of countless books, movies, and TV shows, each one exploring the dark history of the place in their own way. Despite its fame, the Bates Motel remained a place of fear and unease. Even those who did not believe in ghosts or curses could not help but feel a sense of dread as they walked through its empty halls. It was said that the curse of the Bates Motel had never truly been lifted, that the evil that had once haunted the place still lingered, waiting for its next victim. Despite the many rumors and legends that had sprung up around the Bates Motel, there were some who still believed that there was a more rational explanation for the horrors that had taken place within its walls. They pointed to the abusive relationship between Norman Bates and his mother, arguing that it was this twisted bond that had driven Norman to commit his heinous crimes. Others suggested that the Bates Motel was simply a product of its time, a reflection of the societal fears and anxieties of the post-war era. They argued that the motel's dark history was a warning about the dangers of isolation and the importance of seeking help when struggling with mental illness. Whatever the true explanation for the horrors of the Bates Motel, one thing was clear: it had left an indelible mark on the world of horror and had become an enduring symbol of our fascination with the dark side of human nature. In the end, the legacy of the Bates Motel was not just one of fear and terror, but also of fascination and intrigue. It remained a place of mystery and legend, a place that would continue to captivate and terrify us for generations to come.